Good morning. We're live here in San Francisco at Bird and Beckett Books in Glen Park. My name is Denise Sullivan, and welcome to SF Live's Live Talks. This morning, my guest is Graciela Ronconi, a vintage clothing expert, small business owner, and longtime San Franciscan. Good morning, Graciela.
Good morning, Denise.
Yeah.
It's such an honor to be here. Thanks for having me. And thanks for Bird and Beckett for, this wonderful space and for hosting these shows.
Yeah, we have two wonderful assistants, Jenna and Gabby, this morning. So thanks for that. And you know what it's like to get up in the morning, unlock the door of your own shop, because
yeah.
you've been doing it for what?
Oh, geez. 1994. So what's that?
Yeah.
28 years?
Wow.
No, it's 2023, 29 years.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
So going on 30 years.
Yeah.
Now, I want to just get right into it, but first, let me ask. I like to start with finding out how you did through the pandemic, and I will say that one of the things that caught my attention was that you kind of moved forward with your business through the pandemic, but the basic part, health-wise, your immediate family, did you guys do all right?
Luckily, health-wise, I even lost weight. I think I got healthier actually during the pandemic. Health-wise, I'm very grateful that, we didn't get COVID and my family was okay. But as far as the business goes, there was a big shift. As you know, I was on Haight Street for 10 years prior to the pandemic. But during the pandemic, I decided, I'm just going to sell online and just kind of do a shift. So I moved everything to my workspace, which is on 19th and Balboa. But almost immediately, I thought, you know what? I should open to the public on the weekends. I'm here anyway. And I didn't expect much when I first moved in. I thought, oh, if somebody sees something online, they could come in and try it on. But it's incredible how wonderful the neighborhood, has responded. And my old customers are also finding me in this new location.
Yeah.
In fact, this month I decided to, instead of opening 3 days a week, I'm opening 4 days. I'm open on Mondays as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And coming just off the Christmas season, I know you had a special arrangement to go back for kind of a pop-up situation in the Haight through San Francisco Heritage, but and I want you to tell me about that arrangement as we go. But just immediately, how was the Christmas season this year?
The Christmas season was pretty amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. When I left the Haight, it was pretty. It seemed like a third of the businesses had closed down in the Haight.
Yeah.
So, it was pretty sad to see that. But just being back in the Haight for the month of December,
Yeah.
it was so alive and lots of tourists. So it was really wonderful to see that. And we did pretty well. So that was pretty nice.
That's
Yeah.
really good news because, I mean, I haven't talked, it's only, January 8th.
Right.
So people were just kind of crawling out of the
Right.
Christmas season, recovering from the retail, frenzy and everything. So,
And
I
also
hope-
Balboa.
oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's we have a very nice following, and there's a cafe that opened up the street,
Right.
the Coffee Movement,
Yeah.
and a cute little gift shop. It's wood goods and hot sauce, and it's a little business district,
Right.
but we're pretty mighty, I would say.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's kind of neat that the differences. The Haight Street, the walking traffic is always there, but with being there on Balboa, it's like this little community just kind of propped up. And
Right,
yeah,
right.
so it's
Little
fun.
neighborhoody versus like tourist destination
Exactly.
and well-known
Right.
strip.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so the contrast is, pretty significant, but I like them both,
yeah. Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Best of both worlds. So take me back, if you will, to I don't know if we want to start at the beginning, but it does seem relevant actually to get into your interest in vintage shopping and then vintage style and then ultimately vintage selling. So take me back to your
Yeah.
growing up and your first contact with vintage world.
Okay, well, if we start at the beginning, I would say it would be in the early 70s. And, you know, uh, I, I'm part of an immigrant family. So, we didn't have a lot, right? Um, so we would go thrift shopping a lot. And so that's where my love of, restoring used things and vintage came about.
Let me stop for a minute.
Yeah,
I know that your mom came from El Salvador,
right.
and she was a single mom for a time with the four of you. You said,
There were four siblings, right?
yeah.
When she, almost about a year after she arrived, she did marry,
Okay. So
so.
it's a blended family situation.
Right, exactly. And, but unfortunately, my stepdad did pass away young.
Right.
So, Denise, I don't know how she did it. She was a custodian at the Academy of Science. And we lived in Noe Valley, out of all
Wow.
places, yeah.
Right.
And
Okay. So here she is, like really hustling to make everything happen for
right.
your family. And so trips to the Salvation Army were kind of a
It was the
thing.
norm for me. It
Right.
was, that's what I grew up with. And,
How did she feel about when you started picking, your style?
well, the funny thing is, my love for vintage continued in my teen years because the Pachuco scene was in, and which, the style, along with Dickies and Ben Davis's, was vintage as well.
Right.
And also, it was very punk to wear vintage back in the late 70s,
Yeah.
early 80s.
Yeah.
So, of course, being a teenager, you want to do something rebellious. But I remember when I was a teen, my mom didn't like that I would, go back to thrift stores
Mm-hmm.
because it was like, now we don't need to go to thrift stores. Dress young.
Yeah.
So, but of course, I had to dress the way I
Right.
wanted.
Right. Now, I'm going to make you pause here for a
Uh-huh.
minute because I was thinking about San Francisco style, if there even is such a thing, right? Um, and I'd like you to get into that if you would. But I do think about that 80s and kind of high time for vintage styles of all kinds, right?
Right.
But that look that you're describing, like the Dickies and the Ben Davis and those, that's still popular.
It is. It is.
I mean, so that's a San Francisco style, right?
Right, right.
But I mean, kind of talk about that if you could, and maybe some of the other distinctly SF, clothing.
Right. It's hard to pinpoint San
Right,
Francisco
right,
style because it's so diverse.
right.
But in my own little world, growing up, yeah, I would just like to mix new with vintage. For example, I would wear my Ben Davis's or Dickies with a beaded sweater,
Right.
or for special occasions, I would wear a '60s mod dress. Yeah. So, and then when I was later in my teens, the rockabilly scene was in. So, I dove more into it. So yeah,
So the Haight was kind of the epicenter for all of the vintage stores. I mean, thrift stores and vintage goods, right?
it was. However, growing up in Noe Valley, I was
Yeah.
closer to the Mission. So there were a couple stores in the Mission as well. There
Right.
was Flamingos. Oh, geez. This was, again, late 70s, early 80s. Always and Forever on 24th Street.
Oh,
And that
yeah.
happened to be the store I took over in the or 1994. Yeah.
Okay, but we can't
I
skip
know.
over. We can't skip over.
I'm all over the place.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. No, we can't skip over
So much to talk about.
your apprenticeship
Right.
in the hay, right? Working at all the famous, famous. They're famous to me because I was one of those kids that was, and often couldn't afford what was at La Rosa, right? So I'd be across the street at the Goodwill
Right.
or St. Vincent de Paul, but it was La Rosa, Departures, Aardvarks,
Aardvarks.
and more.
There were more. Yeah.
Right? I mean,
Mascara Club.
oh wow.
That was a good one.
So you were working at a couple of those, right? Wasn't before you
Started my own
Yeah.
business. Yeah, I started working at La Rosa. That was my first experience, professional experience with vintage. And then from there, I worked for Buffalo Exchange for a minute, and then I went back to La Rosa. And yeah, this started in 1987, and in 1993, I decided to go back to school, and
we have to say you went to CCSF and state.
I
right?
did, right, yeah. And then I decided to go back to state because there's so much that happened to me during that period. I was married when I was 24, so in 1991, I was already hitched. So yeah, there was a lot that happened. But yeah, so I had to stop school for a minute, and then I went back in 1993 and to state. But yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
I lost.
No. Well, I mean, I think that you had told me that you were looking into costume design or fashion.
I wasn't sure what
Yeah.
direction I wanted to go to. When I was at City, I was really into the drama department, and I used to love taking the costume classes there. And then at State, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do merchandising or designing. So I was taking all the primary classes. But then, life always takes you a certain route. I was watching Always and Forever, the shop I mentioned earlier on 24th Street. I would watch his shop every now and then, when he couldn't be in the shop. The previous owner, he had he managed salsa bands, and and he was about to open a bar.
Okay,
So,
as we do, jump from
right,
different
exactly.
things. Yeah.
So the vintage business was kind of it wasn't his priority. So I would watch the shop for him. And one day he told me, "Hey, do you want to take over?" And I said, "Sure." And so, being newly married and having the shop, I just couldn't. I couldn't continue school. So
Yeah. But I also have this idea that, if you have kind of retail, in your blood, so to speak, it's
Right.
like this buy, sell, trade. Like you can't really get rid of that no matter what. This like you want to be out there with the public,
Right.
And doing your thing.
Right. Yeah.
So this is where you landed, and now you're a young person, a young woman owning a business on 24th Street,
Right.
which is, that's something.
No, it really was. I didn't think of it at that time.
Yeah.
But now looking back, it's like, wow, I was pretty young,
Yeah.
when I started.
Yeah.
But luckily it just kind of landed,
And what were you
on my
seeing?
lap.
Like I was thinking about, vintage, I mean, back then when you started, it was really about style. And now we've kind of come to this point where it's more about, reuse and recycle and sustainability. And there's that component to it, right?
Right.
But when it was the 90s in Noe Valley,
Right.
who was coming through? Who was shopping for? And maybe you were trading like in 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s
Right. That
ish.
was the vibe back then.
Right.
It was very rockabilly and swing. So I did cater more to that crowd. Um,
Performers,
I,
just kids
I,
or
yeah, kids, performers, lots of locals that live there in the area, but also, out of towners, because I know me, for example, go to, if I visit a town, I have to hit all the vintage stores,
right.
so, yeah, so people would make their rounds
Okay, and we must add that this was before the internet.
before the internet.
So there was a network, there's a network of vintage buyers, sellers, and enthusiasts, right? Who
Right.
would get word, oh, when you're in San Francisco, you have to go,
Right.
right?
Right.
Was that how it worked?
Yeah, and there were several books published also of where to shop,
Right.
So, yeah, I have a couple of those in my collection where they mention the shop, the
Wow.
Love Street, or not Love Street, what was it back then? Guys and Dolls.
Yeah. So you had kind of grown a reputation for the types of things that you were carrying. And if you don't mind to just go in a little more specifically, because I don't have this language, but the fabrics, the quality of the goods. What were you looking for at that time before we get to
At that time, I was looking a lot for mainly the style. Um, like as I mentioned, rockabilly and swing was very popular. So like little black dresses, I couldn't sell enough of those.
right?
Little cocktail dresses, and there were so many different events to go to. So definitely, people were not as casual as they are today,
Good
So,
point.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I would sell a lot of cocktail dresses, um, special event items. Um, and as far as I always try to look for good quality in
Right.
items. So, and if you think about it, if these items have held up this long, they're you
Right.
know they're made pretty well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So when Noe Valley and Guys and Dolls ran its course, or you made a decision to pack up.
I did. This was 2008, and this is when the economy was tanking.
Right.
All right. So again, my thought was, okay, I'm just going to sell online. So that's when I headed west to the Balboa and 19th
Right. The
workspace.
storage
Right.
workspace. Yeah.
So, but back then it was strictly workspace storage, and almost as soon as I got that together, I was lured to, to retail again, and yeah, so that's when I started the shop in the Haight.
And that's Love Street.
That's Love Street Vintage, right? Although I will say that when I first started, it was Mystery Mister, because I
Oh,
used to share with a friend.
got it.
Yeah, so half of the shop was antiques and the other half was clothes. So for the first 5 years, that's how it was. But then this second half, it was just me, and it was Love Street Vintage.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're back on Haight Street. It's the now we're into the turn of the century, and like you said, the economy had tanked, and there also was the rise of online retail, and I'm just wondering how that changed the the business. Because it seems like at that point eBay had also come on the scene, and like
Right.
suddenly everybody's a vintage buyer and seller,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So how did that impact your work?
Dramatically,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah. Um, Luckily, I like selling online. So, I was able to adapt. I started with eBay. But as far as the whole vintage scene, there were these clothing shows or antique shows,
Right.
and they just were not as popular anymore because, before the internet, it was me, for example, uh, I looked forward to these shows and I would save money for these shows.
Right.
And that was my one shot to, just see a big diversity of product.
Right.
But now with the internet, I mean, I could, in any time of day, I could, it's pretty much like
Shop.
shopping a shop. You're right.
Well, okay, this is really interesting to me because I hadn't actually thought this through. Oh, good, we have plenty of time because I'm getting interested now. So this idea, I mean, it reminds me a little bit of music or kind of like anything that's has a community surrounding it. Okay, the vintage clothing folks are a community, and you had these gathering spots that were shops or swap meets or vintage trade shows, right? Or that the public is open, or even at the I bet when you would go and look for stuff at estate sales or whatnot, and you'd see your fellows there like, hey, how you doing? We're looking for the same stuff, or I know you like this and I don't, right? But that's gone because you're shopping online in the middle of the night, or and it's like, what happens to that gathering, that community, that face-to-face? Not to mention, you can't touch the clothes, you can't look at the jewelry up close.
Right.
So what was that all about? I mean, and that continues, right?
It does, but I would say that community is still there. For example, when I was in the Hague, last month, it was nice to see all the old merchants, vendors that I known for a while, and there's a lot of new ones too, and it was nice to meet them.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a community, but you're right, it's not. I don't think it's as big as it was, or
maybe not as well. Like everything else, it's not as cohesive, or it's more fragmented, scattered.
Right.
Because
yeah.
people from all over the world are participating, so that's the good side.
Right. Exactly.
And you don't always get to see them face to face.
Right. Yeah. But when you do see them face to face, like somebody buys something in Japan and they come to the shop, and it's really nice, to have. So it's almost a different way of that commune with people,
right?
Right. Yeah. But you're right. For every day, it is different. But you can still go to a show, with people with same interest and.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. What has happened? I mean, I know the pandemic has changed so much too, but the culture of the gatherings, like the vintage shows, like a lot of people would go to LA from here and vice versa.
Right.
So you would have that monthly or, quarterly kind of big event. But a lot of those things shut down during the pandemic. So is that coming back?
It is.
Okay.
The only show I participated here in the Bay Area was a current affair, and that was held in Richmond. I hope they come back to the Bay Area,
Right.
but yeah, during the pandemic, they shut down all their shows, and then they started doing these lives on Instagram. And, and by the way, that's a whole nother
we
segment.
can talk about that. Yeah.
But I digress too much. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, so I did a current affair, and there's also this big show in Las Vegas, which is called Viva Las Vegas.
Okay.
And that attracts people from all over the world.
Wow.
Yeah, so that has last April was the first time they brought it back since the pandemic. So and I didn't know what it was going to be like, if people were too scared to travel or
Right.
but no, it was
Wow.
completely filled. Yeah.
Wow.
So I think people are they're hungry,
They're
to get out
hungry.
there.
Yeah. And to find their people and be back in community. That brought to mind a lot of stuff. Okay, you mentioned Japan and the not just a collector, shoppers, but I've always heard that, Japan loves American style goods. And there was a time, buying up Levi's or,
Right.
James Dean style jackets or whatever,
Right.
logo things. Is that still the case? And what other countries are really like style minded? Do you find that you get a lot of interest, people browsing or coming through?
Right. With the internet, it's fun because you really get to see,
Yeah.
the trends in different places. With the Japanese, it's not as popular as it was, let's say, in the 90s.
Right.
But yeah, no, definitely the Japanese are still very much into Americana. Maybe things that are not so old, but it could be 70, or excuse me, old Patagonia wear, for example.
Wow.
I know.
Okay, who thought that would be
know, right?
fashionable? Okay.
So, it does change.
Yeah.
But other places, well, also what's sad is with the pandemic, a lot of the international, buying kind of stopped for a minute, but I see it coming back.
Yeah.
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 But England is huge.
Right.
Yeah, I send a lot of things to England, Germany, and I would say mostly European countries.
Yeah.
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 Australia as well.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, we always think of English, style, like being very style conscious, especially from the 60s, right?
Right.
And I know that, and there's kind of that, what do I want to say, like exchange with the hate and kind of a history there with kind of I don't know what I'm trying to say. I need to get that together. But I think of, when I think of the 60s and 70s, I think of English style and rock and roll style, and I equate that with the hate. And I don't know if that's all mixed up, but I would like you to speak to that a little bit, because you have that relationship with the street, and also that those styles came back around, and then I bet when you were on Haight Street, people came looking for hippie stuff, right?
Right, yeah.
And so, I don't know, try to make that connection for me, because I'm not doing so hot.
Well, the connection for me, it's very nostalgic of my childhood.
Yeah.
It was, the later half of the hippie era. So it was more hippies that were grown up. If that makes any sense. And Noe Valley was like that,
Wow.
I would say,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm
A lot of
like
artists.
Joni Mitchell types. I don't know,
Right.
more grown up.
Rich hippies, we
Rich
call
hippies,
them, right?
exactly. So, but actually, when I put this shop together in the Haight, that's kind of what I had in mind. There was, I just thought of fern bars. I thought of, if Joni Mitchell lived here when she was young, what kind of store she would want to go to. So all those things I had in mind when I set the store in the Haight.
Right.
And so that was my take. But obviously, there's that connection with the 1960s and the whole hippie revolution in the Haight. So it tied in pretty well.
Well, and I guess now I'm able to remember kind of where I was going with it. Also, this idea of makers, handmade goods, right? And that coming back. And it kind of, the revival of the old styles intersected a little bit with this back to handmade and kind of more natural and not mass-produced items, which is like, we need to say this, that you are not like trading in fast fashion styles. You are really looking at quality handmade goods, and it just so happened that the trend was that.
Right.
I
Exactly.
mean, I'm kind of interested in the trend followers versus the trend setters, so to speak. Can you, like, was it just happenstance? You're like, oh, I think I'll just go for this 70s, like Laurel Canyon kind of style in the hate.
Right.
Or was that in the air? Or,
It
like,
was in the air, but it's also something I love. I
yeah,
can't really sell something that I don't like.
there you go.
Um, and it's funny, but also, um, as you mentioned, I look for things that are of quality, but I don't look for things that are quality just American styles. I look for, or if it comes to me, ethnic wear as well.
Yeah.
Um, and that was pretty popular in the late 60s, early
Right.
70s. And yeah, and that, trickles down to, or trickles up
Yeah.
to popular fashion. Like in the 1970s, the peasant look was very popular, the whole Russian peasant look as well. So that's an example. And that kind of started, from the streets or,
Right.
from, I would
Yeah.
say, the hippie era, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and now I think people are a little bit more cautious as far as ethnic wear.
Oh, you mean in terms of appropriating another culture
Right,
style?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But to me, I just can't. I want to give these garments a second life,
Right.
because they're too beautiful just to discard them,
Yeah.
and I see it more of cultural appreciation and not
Yeah.
cultural appropriation.
Yeah.
um, yeah, so um, and I just like the way people, who do buy these items, just the way they incorporate it in their lives and the way they wear it, and yeah.
Right. Right.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's something. I mean, that's a real it's a real interesting subject, like you said, when it comes to appropriation versus appreciation. I mean, I know that I feel a lot more self-conscious,
Hmm.
and that's perhaps not the right word, but sensitive and aware to these matters, and rightfully so,
Hmm.
right? Because I know that it came to folks' attention, say, when this is really crass and terrible. Young women would be wearing like Native American ceremonial cost,
Oh, like the feather
wear.
hair headdress and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, to a music festival, and it's
Right,
like, okay, no,
right,
right?
right.
That said, there are Native American goods, clothing, jewelry, and whatnot that is crafted to be sold retail to the public. So there's this line. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes. For example, this is a squash blossom from the 70s, and it was made for the general public. It's not made for ceremonial
Right.
um, use. And for example, these days, on top of selling vintage clothing, I also sell new Native American jewelry. And I go to these trade shows and I buy directly from the artists or reps,
Mm-hmm.
um, rep, reps that they sell from different tribes, for example. Um, and for the most part, people are okay wearing it, but I know that some people feel guilty about like wearing a Navajo ring, for example, right? But at the same, and I totally understand and I respect that. But at the same time, these arts and crafts, they're sold for the general consumer. Um, and if we were to stop buying them, there's no way they could make a living.
Yeah.
a livelihood or pass these traits to their children.
Right.
So I don't know. The way I see it is by, my small part is if I buy goods from Native American artists, and they could continue their livelihood and doing something beautiful and creative and passing down their traditions.
Right.
And like, for example, when I wear my necklace here, people ask me, "Oh, what is that?" And
Yeah.
it starts a dialogue.
Yeah.
So I always think it's like, what are your intentions when you wear these items? If I wear a headdress to a concert, that's
No.
right.
Yeah.
That's not right.
Yeah.
I mean, right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's interesting. So, I have now, just say, vintage kimono, and there's a distinction between something that is made to be sold to the tourist or, the traveler, or something that I picked up vintage versus a kimono that was used for special purposes.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and a lot of the vintage kimonos that I come across were usually brought over by servicemen, for example, which was like a tourist item
Right.
that they bought.
Right.
And also, you had mentioned, we had this conversation before, but we were talking about another example is like if you were to go to Guatemala, for example, and, you bought a beautiful tapestry, and you help these indigenous women earn a living, that's, but then if you say, no, I don't think that's right, that, I buy these crafts, then, how are they going to make their living?
Right.
So I always think it's what's your intention,
Yeah.
and are you appreciating it?
Yeah.
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 So that's, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I know that the San Francisco Heritage invited you. That's Back to the Hate, and I want to talk a little bit about that. It's like the space that you were occupying was the last space that you were in as Love Street on Haight Street, right? It came open again, and they are using, San Francisco Heritage is using that space for its own purposes to promote San Francisco heritage,
Right.
and vintage style and vintage clothing, and your business is part of that heritage, part of that Haight Street heritage. Like, this is not just a what do I want to say, like just a fly by night surface kind of like, oh, let's sell some stuff at Christmas time thing. This is part of a legacy, is what I'm trying to say. And so you were invited to come back into this space, which I believe is actually a historic space where fashion was being made and sold.
Actually, it was just two doors
Two
down.
doors down. Oh, okay. Well, help me out
Sorry.
then.
But no, that building itself, it's a landmark.
Yeah.
And my old landlord donated the building. It was in his will. He donated the building to San Francisco Heritage.
Amazing.
I know, when he passed. And San Francisco Heritage has done an amazing job, restoring the building and, keeping it the way Norm would want it. Yeah.
Wow.
And, they were wonderful landlords when I was there. And so when I moved out, they decided to keep the space as an art space.
Right.
So every month they want to, have different artists and from different backgrounds. I think once they had like the Mission Cultural Center, or
Right. And doing like screen prints.
yeah,
and,
doing different
yeah.
things. So it's neat what they're doing.
Yeah.
So they invited me back for December, and so I was honored, to
Yeah.
to
And
be back there.
It should be said, it is the corner of Haight and Ashbury.
It's close to the corner. It's 1506 Haight.
Right.
Yeah.
But that building does
right,
have
yeah.
quite a presence
Oh yeah.
there.
Oh
at the
yeah.
corner.
Yeah. The shop you mentioned earlier is Nasitica.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and this woman, Peggy Carsarda, owned that shop, and she wrote a book. And yeah, she had quite an adventure there in the Haight. She was girlfriends with Janis Joplin, and she is credited to make the bell-bottom pants popular. So
Right,
yeah,
right. So that's like I mean that's documented in plenty of history books,
right.
especially like any photos from the era. You will see a lot of models and musicians posed on that corner
Right.
wearing some of those clothes,
Uh-huh.
um,
And possibly some of her clothes as
and some
well.
of her some of
The
her
Grateful
clothes.
Dead, actually. Yeah,
Absolutely.
you know, they were some of her biggest customers.
Yeah.
So,
So that's quite a corner, and I would say quite an honor to be doing business there.
yeah.
You know, all these years later, 50 years later or 60 years later,
Right.
it still kind of survives in that it's kind of funky,
Uh-huh.
and but people from all over the world will pass through. It's kind of like a crossroads. I want you to speak a little bit about that, just doing business as a small business woman and having to maintain a shop, you know, in a neighborhood that is world renowned, and it also has its economic ups and downs and seasons, right?
Mm-hmm.
You said this Christmas was good, but
It was.
the pandemic was a downturn, and there might be seasons where business was off, or there, you know, we know that there have historically been the Haight has had its ups and downs.
It has. Yeah, no, like with any
Yeah,
business, obviously COVID was a big one. You know, people couldn't
yeah,
travel as much. So there's so many tourists that go to the Haight that when I was down there, that was a big chunk of my business. I would say probably more than half.
yeah.
So I knew it was going to be very hard for me if I stayed there during that time. But yeah, like I said, going back in December, it's so alive again, and it was nice to see people, from all over the world visiting again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, you know, we know that there's pretty well known unhoused and sort of travelers and young, people who gather
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
for, you know, for community and also for lack of other place to go,
Right.
right? So negotiating those relationships with people on the street while you're doing business,
Mm-hmm.
how was that this time around versus in other eras there?
Well, this time around, I can't really say much because I didn't get to know, the
Right.
people
Yeah.
that um, hang out or live on the streets because I wasn't there that long.
Yeah.
But when I was there, the first time around for when I was there for 10 years, um, I got to know a lot of the street kids, and it's a sense of community. They're
Yeah.
part of the community.
Yeah.
And sometimes I almost felt protected by some of them because sometimes I would stay late in the shop, and I never felt threatened um, or scared. We would pass each other by and say hi. So, yeah, it was kind of a Haight Street family.
Right. Right.
And there are, some transient people that come by, and, that's all over the city.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. But, for the most part, the regulars, it was just like, hey, I'm clocking in to my shop. I'm clocking in to hang out at the corner. So I don't know if that makes
Yeah.
any sense. But
Yeah,
yeah,
no, it does.
it was
'Cause
just part of the community.
yeah, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like if you get to know your neighbors, whether
Mm-hmm.
they're housed or doing business or unhoused,
Mm-hmm.
it does become a community. And San Francisco being a small city, you can go across town and see someone and be like, hey, wait, I know them from,
Right.
and it's like, it's just how we do it here.
Right.
And I also sense that because you are a lifelong San Franciscan, that you do feel comfortable in your city and on your streets. And it seems like a good time to address, that San Francisco hasn't gotten the best press in the last
Right.
year, right? And
Right.
for better and for worse, we do know that there are seemingly intractable problems, but there's a lot of good here still, and there's a lot of joy. And I know that your husband and you met here in the city, like you, he, you are San Franciscans, and so tell me a little bit about that life and the joy and what you see are as San Francisco strengths and
Yeah.
weaknesses.
Well, just the environment itself, the ocean, the parks, that alone is worth living here for me. It's there's so much diversity in the landscapes. You drive 1 hour north, and it's so different from driving 1 hour east from here. So, first of all, that's what I love about the city. And I love the diversity in people as well. Speaking of vintage, I could wear a Victorian dress and nobody gives a hoot. You know what I mean? So, or if I wear, something ethnic, it starts a conversation. Um, so that's what the second thing I love about the city, just the diversity of the people. And yeah, it's and yeah, I know, people may think it's scary, the unhoused, but I don't know. That's always been a fabric of the city.
Yes, it
So
has.
we just, need to learn how to just grow with it,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, and speaking to the diverse cultures and the changing kind of cityscape. I mean, we talked about stores being shuttered on Hay
Mm-hmm,
Street during the
mm-hmm.
pandemic, and I look around. Um, we were talking about the Richmond district, and I look on Geary Boulevard, and it's a little bit like, what's going on
I
here,
know.
right? And you can point to other areas in the city where there's a lot of closed small businesses,
Mm-hmm.
and part of San Francisco's charm, so to speak, is this idea of the boutique, unique, and multicultural business. But as we see our multicultures being displaced and the city becoming a little bit more of a monoculture, whether it's tech or just wealth, that has
Mm-hmm.
sort of erased some of that charm again, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak. But bearing in mind that these are real folks, real communities that cannot afford to stay here or have been actually kind of pushed to the side.
Right.
How do we retain that spirit and that diversity that we are known for and we love? How can we, as small business owners, as shoppers,
Mm-hmm.
as citizens and neighbors, support each other? Like, what do you need as a small businesswoman from your community, from your city, from your customers?
Mm-hmm.
What would
That's a
help you?
$1 million question. However, Connie Chang, our district supervisor, came into our shop a couple months ago, and unfortunately, I didn't get to talk to her. But my husband happened to be in the shop, um, and she was just so delighted about the shop, and she said, "Hey, if I could help you guys in anything, let me know." And the reason I wasn't at the shop because my mom had just passed.
Right. I'm sorry. Yeah. It's okay. I'm
Sorry.
sorry. Yeah. Your mom was
But
a big part of your
she
story.
was. But Connie Chang was really nice. That she wrote me a letter and said, "I'm really sorry, but if there's any way I could help." So that really meant a lot.
Wow. You don't, I'm sorry, but it's very moving, and you don't hear that much about public officials.
No, not at all. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cry. I wasn't even going to
No.
mention that about my mom. But as far as support,
Yeah.
that was a beautiful example.
Wow. Wow.
So um,
Just a caring, this is what you're saying. This is what I'm hearing. It's like a caring, kind word from a neighbor, from a friend,
right,
from, just so happened was your supervisor popped in. But a human interaction. Like we come into the bookshop, we meet Jenna or Gabby here, we say, hey, how are you doing today?
right,
Instead of like, I need this book, I gotta go.
right,
Right?
right. It's
Taking
true.
some time.
Right.
Just as we've had many San Franciscans on to talk, and when we were talking to people who specialized with unhoused population, that was the number one thing that we hear. Talk to people, look them in the eye, and say, "How are you doing?" People just want to talk and be seen,
Right.
right?
Exactly. Yeah, I
So
agree.
that was a personal answer to a big question, and I get it, and I hear it, and I feel it. If
And
there's anything else you can add or think of that, you know,
yeah, and the city is always changing. I've been here in the city since 1971, and there's it's changed. It, that's the beautiful part about the city. It's always changing, and um, folks come and go, and economy, you know, it, it's high. It's yeah, the economy goes up and down, but San Francisco always seems to survive.
right,
you know,
right,
um, and I know we're having a big problem with the unhoused, and but like you said, I need to remind myself too. It's these are people
yeah,
that it's we have to know what they want, what they need, and yeah,
yeah. Talk to each other.
right.
Well, I have to say, that's what I'm just checking our time here because we
Mm-hmm.
usually come right in on the nose, but that's what I've attempted to do with this series, and I really appreciate you and folks like you being willing to open up because this is how we get better, I
Mm-hmm.
think. And after the pandemic and life in general is just hard, for a lot of us. And to just take this time, it's just an hour that we spend together, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll see you on the street and I'll wave when you're in your shop, and then I'll go on my business, and you'll do your business. But really, that to just pause and to reflect on how precious these moments are, and that you've seen a lot of San Francisco. Your mom saw a different San Francisco.
Right.
My mom saw a different San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing a different San Francisco. The city's going to be here long after we're gone.
Right. Right.
And what I think I'll take a moment to just talk about what we're trying to do here with these broadcasts is to get real San Franciscans, folks like yourself, to have these kinds of discussions so the people of the future may come upon this video someday and be like, wow, this is what they were dealing with in San Francisco 2023. There was a pandemic like there was early in the 20th century, and there was an economic crisis. There was a polarized United States where people on one side of the political spectrum and the far other side were virtually at war, on the
Mm-hmm.
verge of like a civil war. I don't think people will be able to fathom or believe really what we've lived through, but I think that you and I, Graciela, and anybody who has lived and survived this long in San Francisco are really lucky. I think that's partly why I'm moved by your story. We have seen so many different eras and historic. When you talk about this, the cultural revolutions of the 60s and 70s, and then we lived to see the tech boom come and then go,
And those are two big extreme examples.
and everything else in between. And you're still here, opening a shop during the pandemic, thriving. That is like a real San Franciscan thing. That's what we do.
You're absolutely right. That is pretty amazing to think about it that way. Yeah.
Right?
Because like you said, we appreciate small businesses. We appreciate community. That's what makes our neighborhoods.
Yeah.
We're not cookie cutter.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I feel very fortunate to have grown up in the city and to be able to still live here. I'm very fortunate that way.
Yeah. Well, we're lucky to have you and a small business like yours and to just be alive at this time on the other side of all that's gone down.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah, good luck with Love Street on Balboa Street in the central Richmond and popping up wherever you might go, trade shows and fairs and the next special event and online. Let folks know where to find you.
lovestreetsf.com.
Okay. And now
Instagram as well, lovestreetsf.com.
we didn't even get into
or Love Street
Instagram.
SF.
Love Street SF on Instagram. And we will, so we'll find you there 4 days a week and 24 hours a day on Instagram.
Yes.
And we'll be here next month at Bird and Beckett, San Francisco Livestock, always the second Sunday of the month. Thank you, Graciela.
Thank you, Denise. This is such a pleasure.
Yeah.
I always love talking to you.
Really great to see you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks again, Gabby, Jenna, Eric, Bird and Beckett. We'll be back next month.